Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is where you are at this moment. Today is going to be lesson 4. Has to do with the investigation of vice crimes. So what are vice crimes? Well, the obvious ones are prostitution, gambling, obscenity laws. Crimes against children often fall into the vice category, trafficking, those type of things. So that's what we're going to talk about. Now, being a vice detective is a very challenging job. Not exactly like Miami Vice is portrayed and has been portrayed. I think they had an old original TV show, and now there's either a movie or a new TV show, Miami Vice. At times, it is just as exciting. Many of the police departments have a unit where the vice and the narcotics detectives work together. Many times, a detective would be both a vice and a narcotics detective. Where I worked, we had a fairly large unit where we had vice cops, vice detectives, narcotics detectives, and our intelligence unit was also in that same office. And we all interacted. Sometimes we would need extra bodies, so we'd borrow some vice cops. And same with the vice detectives. If they needed some extra bodies, they would use us, and I'll talk about a few of those times. So a lot of people, let's talk about the first two of those categories, prostitution and gambling. A lot of people would say that those might be victimless crimes. I'm going to share a couple of stories with you to show you that they're really not. Let me just say that when it comes to the prostitution thing, now let's take a prostitute. I've talked to many that I arrested in drug cases or other cases for that matter, but I can't remember any of those gals that I arrested and interviewed. They didn't share with me that they had an addiction problem, a drug problem. So that's why the vice and the narcs kind of have to work together, because so many times in the gambling world or the prostitution world or even the exploitation of children world, drugs are also involved. So, you know, some of these gals on the street, what we call streetwalkers, perform acts from, $25 to $50 for a quick encounter, and then we go all the way up to what we call escorts or the high-end prostitutes, where they get thousands of dollars an hour. And some of them travel clear across the country to attend parties and events where they're paid thousands of dollars because they're very beautiful women. So it's a huge world and a huge problem. So we'll get back and talk about prostitution some more in a minute. Let's go to the gambling side, and we'll take care of some of that. A lot of people think gambling is a victimless crime. People want to lose their money gambling. That's their business. Well, let me tell you a quick story of a lady when I was working white-collar crime. This lady came in probably in her 60s, maybe even a little older than that, well-dressed. And she explained to me that she and her husband ran this restaurant, a very popular, well-known restaurant in town. I had eaten there myself many times. Very, very good restaurant. Unfortunately, the husband, who had worked over 30 years building this business, ran the kitchen and handled all the help, that type of thing. And this wife, she handled the books. She paid the bills, did all the banking and all of that stuff. So the husband had no feel for what was going on. Bottom line is, she was in debt big time because of gambling. Now, she shared with me And she got into this many, many years earlier, where she would deal with a street bookie, a partner that she knew, and she would bet on things, sporting events, that type of thing, and things went pretty well. Sometimes she would get in the hole, owe him money that she couldn't pay, but she would then go to a loan shark who she was referred to by the bookie, and she could borrow that money at like a 20% interest rate and be able to pay the bookie, and then she'd have to pay off the loan shark. But she was able to do that and got away with it for many, many years. Well, that's when gambling was illegal in the state. Then we legalized gambling, and all these casinos opened. Well, this was like a child in a candy store. So she daily would make the drive to a casino and gamble. Now, when she's sitting in front of me, she was tens of thousands of dollars in debt and didn't have money in the bank to cover that. She was in big trouble. The loan shark that she had gone to gave her the money, high interest rate. She'd paid off all the money that she had taken from the bank accounts, put that back in the bank so the business could keep running. But the loan shark was making threats. I want my money now or else. And the or else was, your business might burn down. And of course, she's devastated. She's crying. Her husband had worked all these years to build the business, and she had to. And this loan shark was basically saying, hey, the insurance will cover what you owe me, and then some. So either come up with the money, or who knows, a fire could start in the kitchen or something. And a professional arsonist knows how to do those things. So she was devastated, owed all this money, didn't know what to do, came to the white-collar crime offices where she was referred to. And I referred her to our intelligence unit. And I'm not sure what all they did. I know they did some phone monitoring and surveillance on this loan shark group. And I'm not sure how it came out, but last I knew, that restaurant was still up and running. So I think they were able to help her out. So it's not a victimless crime. Now, if you think loan sharks are something you just see in movies, let me just share another quick story of a fellow that I met, that I worked with quite a bit, who had changed his ways. He had belonged to an outlaw biker gang in California, a very famous one, maybe the biggest one. And his job in this club was collections. So many times outlaw organized biker clubs are used by bigger people, even the mob, to make collections, to take care of business, as they say. Well, he was a collector, and he shared these stories with me. He had done time in prison for some of the things he'd been prosecuted for and sent to the pen, and had now changed his ways. But he was big, intimidating-looking fellow, all tatted out, muscular, not somebody you just want to go up and poke a finger in his chest. When he would go collect money from someone who owed the club money or someone else money, and he was directed by the club to go get the money, he would go with what I call dykes, but a lot of people call them wire cutters. And he would go and confront this person and say, you know what these are, you know what I can do with them, etc. I'll be back tomorrow, I want my money. And then he would come back the next day, and if the money wasn't there, all of it, he would take a digit, usually a little finger, and snap that baby off. And tell that person, I'll be back tomorrow, and I'll either have the money or another digit. And he said he never had to take a second finger off. People would somehow find that money and show up. So that's real. That really happens. So if you think gambling isn't real and you think loan sharking isn't real, maybe that will bring reality home to you. Now, gambling is a huge problem. Now that it's legalized in so many states, it's not as big a problem, I don't think, as it used to be. I mean, there's lotteries in almost every state. A lot of people use that, legalized gambling, and then all the casinos. So it's taken care of some of the gambling issues. But there's still gambling houses that go on where people want to go and drink and party with people they know and gamble. And occasionally one of those gets raided. And if the person running the house is taking getting a take from the proceeds, they could be arrested. But not like it used to be. Gambling is not the problem that it used to be. And it's a huge problem for people that have that addiction. But for law enforcement, not as much as it was. Now, in the casinos, of course, there's a lot of trickery that goes on, and we have special agents. A lot of the casinos hire people privately to monitor the machines, monitor the gambling, monitor the tables, and try to catch people cheating and that kind of thing. So let's go back to the prostitution, pandering, pimping, exploitation of children, obscenity laws. Prostitution, like I said, is providing sex for something of value. It doesn't have to be for money. It can be sex for drugs, which happens often. Many females and males support their habit by performing a sex act to get the drugs. That's very common. I could tell you many, many stories, terrible stories that I've heard firsthand. But prostitution is out there. Before I finish, I'm going to tell you some of the techniques we used with the Vice Unit to enforce prostitution. Let's go into pandering. Pandering would be providing a place for prostitution to take place. Now, today in every state, there's private clubs. Sometimes takes place in someone's house or a nice hotel that's rented. But it's a private club where it's kind of like bring your own booze club, and you pay an entry fee. Could be just for that one night event, or it could be a yearly membership. And some of them are established clubs where they don't have a liquor license, but they're running a private club where people bring their own drugs or alcohol if they want. I'm sure there's drugs going there too. But there's, the alcohol enforcement people can't really do much about it because they're not selling the drugs. But these people come there, a lot of them couples, single men, single women sometimes, and they're there to have sexual encounters with other people. A lot of the wife swapping or couple swapping takes place in those kind of organizations. Now, the pandering would come in if there happened to be like a prostitute that was working there, and often there are. So these beautiful women come in and provide sex to the lonely fellows that show up that don't have a mate or no one's interested in them, and they pay for the sex. Now, if it can be proven that the operator of that private club was aware of that, and maybe if he wasn't aware of it, it's still taking place, that's pandering. You're providing a place for prostitution to take place. So that's going on. Obviously, trafficking is going on all across our country. I'll touch on that a little bit more. Pimping, that's obvious. A pimp is someone who makes a living or gets proceeds from someone who is a prostitute. A lot of times a pimp will have a number of girls working for him, And sometimes it's a female. Sometimes the boss, the madam, is a female. And they'll have a number of girls or boys sometimes children, unfortunately, working under them. And those are pimps. And unfortunately, that is an ongoing problem. It's a growing problem in this country. Touch on that a little bit more, too. So, pimping, pandering are issues. Now, as we get into the obscenity laws, and I'll go back and talk about some of the techniques we used, but let's cover the obscenity laws a little bit and the exploitation of children. A child is someone under the age of 18 in most states. A couple of states have 19 to become a full adult. So, but in general, if you're 18, you're an adult. So if you're involved with in some type of sex act or a film or photographs, and you're under 18 years of age, the people involved in that can be charged with exploitation of a child. That's a huge problem, and it's a big business, huge business. Now, the age of consent in many states, I'd say 15 is maybe kind of a standard. It can vary a year or two, depending on the state. But the age of consent to have sex is 15 in a lot of states. But if the other party is over 5 years older than the 15-year-old, it could still be a crime. And in some states, if you're in a position of trust, it goes all the way to 21 years of age. Like the victim, in this case, would have to be 21 years of age to consent to sexual encounters with a doctor, a policeman, a judge, a teacher, a person of authority. Many people are married at 17, 18, 19. So it's kind of a strange law, still in effect in a couple of states. So I'm going to touch on another thing where the children become involved. And these are like the movie theaters, the adult movie theaters, adult bookstores. One of the vice detectives that worked in our unit, that was kind of his forte. He would go to the adult bookstores nearly every night. And there was a number of them. And he became well known, obviously, and he'd be buying magazines and buying videos on a regular basis and sitting in the theaters watching the movies. And he would come back with these unbelievable stories of what takes place in those venues. And he would get to the point where he was comfortable enough to ask the people behind the counters, do you have anything with younger people in it? Those kind of questions. Most of them would blow him off and not participate. But he finally had one take the bait. And this person introduced our vice detective to an individual who provided some young people in films and in photographs. And when we first saw those, when he brought them in to put them into evidence, we were all shocked. We couldn't even look at them. It was horrendous. That was actually a big investigation. It was ongoing for quite a while. We got the federal agents involved, and it ran into other states. And I think people were arrested in maybe 3 or 4 different states over that vice detective just being persistent to the point that he finally found somebody to take the bait, and that led him to obtaining this material, which led to him being accepted, and on and on and on, and then wiretaps get involved and surveillance. And unfortunately, it's the real world. So one of the things, let's talk about how we used to work, what we call work the prostitutes. A lot of times you take a brand new cop out of the police academy, and I actually participated one time. So they got me out there. None of the girls on the street would know me. I'm a new cop and look like a GI with a military haircut and all that. And just go into the area where the prostitutes worked. And I was able to do several deals one night. And I'd have a body mic on, and I'd either approach a girl that I thought was a prostitute, or they would approach me, and we would agree on something. I would ask for a certain sex act, and she would tell me what the price would be, and sometimes I'd be in the process of giving her the money and give a bus signal, and boom, the vice guys would come in and arrest her. One really unfortunate thing that happened that night was a cab driver. I approached him at a convenience store, and I asked him if he knew where I could get some. And he says, yeah, hop in. And I get in his cab, and he takes me to a motel room and sends me up to, apartment, motel room, whatever it was. And he says, yeah, right there, she can take care of you. So I went to the door, knocked, and a woman, a not very attractive woman, opened the door and invited me in, saw the cab drive away, knew what was going on, and we arranged a deal within the first 30 seconds. Unfortunately, there was like a 2-year-old boy sitting on the couch. And that was devastating for me. I gave the bus signal as soon as I could, and the vice guys came in, arrested her. Social services came in and took the child, and learned that he was witnessing everything that was going on in that room, and it went on many times every night. Very sad part of prostitution. So if you think it's a victimless crime, think twice. A quick story again along that same line. I had an informant that worked for me many years and opened up that growing up, his mother was a prostitute. And when the Johns would come to their apartment, I believe they had, he was to get in a closet and just be quiet. And he would have to listen to the activity that his mother was involved in. And he grew up that way. And when he got to be about 12 or 13, a young man, in his mind, one guy got kind of rough with his mother, and to the point that he couldn't take it anymore, and he came out of the closet and basically handed this guy his lunch and threw him out the door. So it's not a victimless crime. This guy was still living with it. I mean, he was in his 50s when I'm talking to him, and he was relating these traumatic events when he was a child. So anybody who thinks that prostitution is a victimless crime, they need to rethink it. Other things we used to do in the vice unit when we assisted them, sometimes we'd take a female vice cop, and she would run an ad on the internet or in a newspaper back in the old days, and have a phone number. Guys would call. We'd have an apartment or a motel, and they would arrive. The John would arrive after the deal was kind of discussed over the phone, and unfortunately for the Johns, we'd be in a back bedroom, and our police detective, vice detective, would be dressed somewhat seductively when he would come in. And they'd be very eager, the men, the John, and they would finalize the deal. She would demand the money up front. They would discuss what the sex acts would be, and John would turn over the money, and they would start to move toward the bedroom. Some of the guys would start to disrobe en route. Unfortunately for them, boom, we'd come out the other bedroom door, throw them on the bed, cuff them, and arrest them. Every one of those guys would go to tears. What could be more embarrassing? One guy was a city worker driving a city vehicle. He lost his job, to say the least, in addition to his court issues of being arrested for patronizing a prostitute. Sometimes we'd have our female cops out on the street as streetwalkers, and those were, we would do a number of those in a night. We might knock down 20, 25 Johns in one night with just a couple of girls out on the street, cops. And then they would do a deal, maybe through the car window, and then the girls would tell them what room to go to at a low-end motel. And again, when they come in, she would get the money after they agreed on the sex act, and boom, we'd come in through the adjoining room. A lot of motels have these adjoining rooms. We'd come busting in. Same thing. Guys would always go to tear. How embarrassing. So anyway, in a nutshell, that's kind of what the vice world is about. Very exciting, very sad world, if you really think about it. I'll kind of finish this with a comment. They have a saying in the entertainment world that sex sells. And I would just have to say that sex sells on the street also. Have a good day. Hit the like if you are enjoying these videos, and please subscribe. And I'll be back with another lesson very soon. Have a good day.